the general perception among founders is if they're trying to build a multi-billion-dollar business, they have to move south of the border in order to build that business.
With generative AI, we have the ability to completely change the way we teach and focus on the lab skills, those foundational pieces that you can only get by being in the lab, by being in the field. It's going to transform how we do research. It's going to accelerate that research.
As more and more students hear, when you do a PhD, it's not just about publishing research, it's about starting a business. I think we will start to attract in a different kind of PhD student, one that is more ambitiously thinking about commercialization into the future right from the start of their PhD.
We are breaking the boundaries of education and research. We are going to be levers of economic development for our local communities.
Hi, everyone. This is the TechSurge Deep Tech Podcast presented by Celesta Capital. In each episode, we spotlight issues and voices at the intersection of emerging technologies, company building, and venture investment. I'm Nic Brathwaite, founder and managing partner at Celesta Capital. If you enjoyed TechSurge, subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit TechSurgePodcast.com to sign up for a newsletter and check out our past episodes.
Canada has a surprising problem that almost sounds like a contradiction. Its universities produce some of the best research in the world, yet Canadian businesses spend less on turning research into products than almost any wealthy country. About half the average according to the OECD. It is a country brilliant at discovery and invention, but not nearly as successful at building companies around those science and technology breakthroughs, and more importantly, keeping those companies at home. Nearly half of venture-backed Canadian founders who have raised over $1 million have relocated to the US. In this episode, we discuss these issues with two Canadian universities working to close this commercialization gap. We start in Waterloo, Ontario, with Dr. Mary Wells, Dean of Engineering, and Dr. Chris Hauser, Dean of Science at the University of Waterloo. Waterloo was built by local business leaders in the 1950s with a unique focus on commercialization and creator-owned intellectual property from its inception. Mary and Chris walk us through Waterloo's history and where it stands today. Mary, Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Many of our audience may not necessarily know about the University of Waterloo, especially those who are outside the technology space. So, Mary, why don't you tell us a little bit about the university?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nic. I'd be happy to. And the University of Waterloo is unique, and it has a very different kind of origin story compared to other universities because it was really a university founded by the local community here in Kitchener-Waterloo and the business leaders here. And it was really Ira Needles who, at a Rotary Club meeting a year before the founding of the University of Waterloo, really created a speech to the local community saying, 150,000 engineers needed. That was the title of his speech at the Rotary Club, saying that it was in the 1950s, the space race was on, the Soviet Union had just launched Sputnik, and they were very worried that Canada was falling behind in the technology space, and that in order to make sure we were keeping pace, that we did need engineers. And so he made a plea to the community that he argued that we needed to educate engineers a little differently, and that in addition to theoretical learning in the classroom, we also needed to think about the practical experiential learning they would have in the workplace. And so the idea of a new way of educating an engineer was born. And a year later, which is shocking to me now when I think about how quickly universities move, the University of Waterloo was born with the founding faculty being the Faculty of Engineering and this dream of educating 150,000 engineers in this very different model of pairing theoretical learning with experiential learning and this kind of cooperative education. Fast forward 68 years later, and we are now the largest cooperative education program for a research-intensive university by a mile. We are the leader in the world at doing this. And because of this unique educational experiences, our talent, and cooperative education doesn't just belong in the Faculty of Engineering, it goes across all of our faculties. I think we have 85% of our students now that participate in a cooperative education program are in demand around the world. So I would argue we are the most industry relevant and connected university in the world. The other thing that started right from the start is because it was founded by industry and community leaders, they decided right from the start that the intellectual property would belong to the creator. That was very, very unusual in those days. It continues to exist today. Because of this, we attract some of the most ambitious and talented students here, as well as the most talented professors that are interested in commercializing their research. And so that's why I'm so excited about this conversation today. Because of the elements we put in place at Waterloo has led to very exceptional outcomes in terms of our ability to take ideas from the lab to the marketplace in a very unusual way.
I know for well over 2 decades, University of Waterloo has ranked as Canada's most innovative university, and the university has branded itself Canada's Innovation University. I recently saw some statistics that indicated that companies founded by University of Waterloo alum responsible for something in the range of $400 million of annual revenues globally and employ about 1.7 million people. Now, that number may not seem like a lot to some people, but it's a really significant number when you consider Canada is a country with a population of only about 40 million people, and the University of Waterloo is 69 years old. It's fascinating to me. Anything you want to expand on with regards to that?
Early on, the university was recognized for its expertise in science and engineering, and early stage companies like Microsoft at the time would come to Waterloo to recruit talent. And we were one of the few Canadian universities where they would come to. And Bill Gates actually came and said, this is where he comes to get his talent, in a February of a cold Waterloo winter. And that started to set the trajectory for Waterloo. I think very quickly after that, the birth of RIM, Research in Motion, through Mike Lazaridis, who was an electrical and computer engineering student. And that rose to such prominence so quickly. And that was really the genesis and the beginnings of the smartphone. And that has really changed our whole world in terms of technology. So those kinds of things started to put Waterloo on the map, and people started to pay more attention to it in terms of the talent we were producing and the kinds of things that they were capable of.
What I will note is also go back to the IP policy, which is very unique, and it really is a starting point to a broader ecosystem in that translation. And it's not just that, but it's also how all the other pieces come together. The co-op bringing the real-world industry examples, our incubators, our accelerator, our challenges with industry. It allows our faculty, our staff, our students to really de-risk their ideas and really think about how they can translate that to the market, but in a community that's full of founders and other alumni who have done it. So that $400 million is just that starting point. It's that leverage point that is going to make us even more successful in the future.
If I zoom out a little bit and take the focus more generally to Canadian universities and some of the challenges that we see facing the country, especially around the commercialization gap. Canada's universities are ranked among the best in the world when it comes to scientific research and scientific discoveries, and there is no doubt about the quality of the technical talent that is produced in Canada. I'm a product of Canadian technical training, but I've also been a beneficiary in my operating roles. When I was the CTO of Flextronics, we had over 1,000 engineers based in Canada. They were some of the best, and on every public company's board I've sat on, in the technology space, they've had Canadian engineers, Canadian engineering centers, with significant numbers of engineers contributing to those companies. Yet, there's a persistent perception that not much economic value accrues in Canada as a result of this great scientific research and great technical talent that's produced. An example of that, a glaring one, is in AI. I think something like 3 or 4 of the top AI researchers in the world were based in Canada, and one would argue that AI wouldn't be where it is today were it not for Canadian universities, yet not much economic value so far has accrued to Canada from the AI revolution. What are your thoughts from where you sit? What do you see as some of the primary barriers that still exist? And is the perception real or not?
Well, maybe I'll start. I think I totally agree with you. We were some of the people that did the fundamental research that led to where we are at with AI today. We are also one of the top in the world in terms of the talent we produce. I think there's a couple of things that are hindering our progress around AI. Number one is the public trust of AI in Canada. And maybe it is our proximity to the US as part of a factor in there. But compared to other countries around the world that have really been able to see the benefits of AI, places like China, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, you see in those countries that there's incredible public trust right now, today, and even 6 months ago around the benefits that society will bring, that will be brought to society by AI. That is not the same in Canada. In Canada, it's much, much lower. It's one of the lowest out of the Western world. And without that public trust, the adoption of AI will be much, much slower. And so I do think as a country, we need to address that issue around trust. And I do think Canada has a unique opportunity to play here because, for example, our Canadian engineers all take a voluntary obligation and wear a visual symbol, our iron rings, around the humility we will show, the fact that we will always place the public at the forefront of any technologies we build, and that we will build trusted technologies. That's something we've done for over 100 years now for all the Canadian engineers we graduate from. So I really believe in a world where in some parts of the world we have little regulation of AI, in other parts of the world we may have over-regulation of AI. Canada has a unique opportunity to lead with trusted AI. And this is something we should be doubling down on. I do believe we will be coming out with our updated national strategy around AI in the next few weeks. And I'm hoping that we will also see significant investment from the government in key areas around AI deployment, including embodied AI or physical AI, robotics, automation, et cetera, so that Canada can take a place and start to gain commercially from the advent of AI.
In general, outside of AI, where do you see the biggest challenge?
I'm going to start with a science example in that a lot of what we do is extremely deep tech. We don't know what's going to come out of it. And I was talking to somebody today about kind of being able to control individual photons to look at the quantum properties of a material. What that will mean in 10, 15 years, no idea. But how do we fund that to actually lead to something that might be a new sustainable material, something that is going to be important to healthcare? Our own Nobel Prize winner, Donna Strickland, in 2018, who won the Nobel Prize in 2018, her original work on pulse lasers wasn't necessarily something that they identified as a long-term, here's what it's going to be the application. Decades later, it's the basis for LASIK eye surgery. So how do you fund that technology and that research to bring it forward when we don't know what the outcome will be? How do we continue to support quantum computing, quantum sensors, et cetera? Quantum used to be something that was just, we don't know how to control it. We don't know what it's going to do. But now through our optometry school, we actually have quantum sensors developed as a startup where they can detect early stage macular degeneration. Well, we wouldn't have known that 15 years ago when we invested as an institution directly into quantum sensors. But then on a regulatory standpoint, one of the areas that I find fascinating is in drug discovery. We still depend upon the use of lab mice, lab rats. Well, we're not genetically mice. There's a lot of really cool organoids out there that are being developed. The regulatory framework is that you actually have to test your drug on a mouse before you can test it on a human, despite the fact that the organoid might be the better analog to the human. So we have all these federal regulations that are also holding back really important research that is not being translated here in Canada, but in other environments where the regulatory, the regulations are less. That is getting to market much faster, and we're losing that talent. We're losing those ideas.
And that's an important point because, we obviously in the role that we're in, we meet a lot of founders. And the general perception among founders is if they're trying to build a multi-billion-dollar business, they have to move south of the border in order to build that business. Oftentimes, they believe it's because of financing, because the American investors look at things a little bit less conservatively than, I guess, the Canadian investors. But sometimes they believe they have to do so to get closer to the market, which I often point out I don't understand that because Toronto is not necessarily further from the market than some other parts of the U.S. But there are lots of systems that need to be systemic issues that need to be addressed in order to turn things around. What would you say? You mentioned some of the regulatory ones, especially in the medical space. But what changes are you seeing today that will give you optimism that these changes are likely to come sooner rather than later?
So I'm going to continue on the medical device one, and that is because federal and provincial agencies are realizing that the regulations are holding back that translation of research. And so it's not just the fact that we've been able to build industry connections, we're building connections to the policymakers. And those policymakers are realizing that we might have a better model and that there's a way to get that to market here in Canada, keep that technology here at home, which otherwise, if the regulations are easier in another country, we're going to lose that person immediately. I had dinner last night with a young founder who is still an undergraduate student at the University of Waterloo. They're working in the beverage industry in their startup, and they're looking at a new type of sugar to add into beverages. And they can't get past the hurdles that we have here at home, but they know if they go just a short distance south, that hurdle is not there. We might lose that talent.
I might just add one other point in terms of systemic challenges, and that's the kind of people we have traditionally attracted into PhD programs. They've often been very focused, and this I'm talking about science and engineering, on the research with the outcome being papers. They have, they haven't been, the commercialization or the idea of taking what they're doing from the lab into the marketplace really hasn't been on their radar. And I do think we are starting to see a shift in that mentality now, in part because of this focus on deep tech commercialization. At the University of Waterloo, we've recently launched something called the Academy of Research Commercialization, ARC, which is out of our Conrad School of Entrepreneurship and Business. We just had the first cohort of PhD students across the university, mainly science and engineering, come through that boot camp program to expose these students to what would it mean to what you're doing in terms of thinking about what some of the commercial opportunities might be. We had 30 PhD students that embarked on this boot camp over multiple weekends. To me, that gives me hope and optimism in terms of the appetite we see amongst our students for this. And then again, as more and more students hear, when you do a PhD, it's not just about publishing research, it's about starting a business. I think we will start to attract in a different kind of PhD student, one that is more ambitiously thinking about commercialization into the future right from the start of their PhD.
And I know you have a very unusual PhD for Entrepreneurs program, which I find fascinating. To me, it reminds me of the way Waterloo pioneered the co-op program. Why don't you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. So this was an idea that was brought to me by one of my faculty members, Valerie Ward, in chemical engineering a few years ago. And she was really thinking about those entrepreneurs that are out there being entrepreneurs right now, but they are working on problems that are very, very difficult and hard, and they may have to overcome some scientific hurdles to be able to get further in their commercialization journey. So we were like, well, why wouldn't we give them a pathway in to do a PhD so they can continue to build their business while also uncovering those fundamental issues, scientific issues they need to advance their product. And we were saying, like, when they're looking for funding for their ventures, wouldn't it just be better for the VCs to give them a chance to come back to universities to do a PhD so that they have the infrastructure at their disposal? Why would you pay them to get some of the very fancy, expensive equipment that we have at universities? So we have our first test case now, Drew Davidson, who is working on new materials for firefighting clothes. His mother was a firefighter, and I hadn't realized this, but firefighters have a much higher chance of developing cancers because many of the materials that are used to resist the heat and flames are carcinogenic. And so he's very motivated to look at new materials for firefighting clothes. So he came into a couple of years ago to do a PhD under this model that we're trying out, and he's been so successful. Going into the university ecosystem with these ideas, he's both been able to look at developing these new materials, but also continue to build his business at the same time. And I think this could be a wonderful model that we could follow to give that pathway in for entrepreneurs to do a PhD. It's a little bit different because normally in science and engineering, the professor will really kind of guide the student and already have some of those intellectually curious ideas. So it will mean that as a university and our professors will have to rethink and be open to hearing about from the entrepreneurs, these are the ideas I want to work on, and be willing to kind of work with them on those ideas. But we're super excited about it and can't wait to see what happens.
That is just a fantastic initiative.
Thank you.
One of the things that I'm really excited about the entrepreneurship PhD program that they've started is that it helps to set a model in the way in which we are going to be able to evaluate faculty in the future. Again, we evaluate faculty by the number of papers they have. Well, I remember a case many years ago at another institution where we had a faculty member going up for tenure. He had developed this device that he held the IP on, and it was going to be high throughput testing for the pharmaceutical industry. The impact that device was going to have was going to be far more transformational than a couple of papers. I would love to see that this entrepreneurship PhD comes down into the way in which we think about the professoriate in the future, because that's where you're going to get further translation.
So let's talk about what's happening inside the labs. Let's start with you, Chris. If I were to tour your labs today and you were taking me around and I said, Chris, we only have a few minutes, so take me to a couple of sites, a couple of places in the lab and show me something that will just blow my mind. Tell me what you would show me and why I would be impressed.
So I think I would take you to two different labs. One being in the basement of IQC, our Institute for Quantum Computing, and that's where two of our faculty members are working on next-generation ion-trap quantum computers. And this is one where it's about really making this useful and being able to solve problems directly. But it's being done through a program called Open Quantum Design, which is basically GitHub for quantum computing that is global, and it's centered at Waterloo. And it's this way of building an ecosystem internationally that brings this technology forward, and we're advancing quantum computing much faster than we would have if we were all just working on individual parts in our own labs. But why I wanted to start there is because our investment as an institution in quantum many years ago has led us to be leaders in quantum communication, quantum sensors. So as we think about the future with AI and the need for cryptography, as we think about how quantum could eventually be used for medical diagnosis, for communications with satellites, it all started with that initial investment in that lab. So that second lab I would take you to is in optometry, where they have developed a quantum device that can detect macular degeneration much earlier. And so it's translating that initial investment, that theory, right through to something that is going to be able to be put in any optometrist office around the world. That is a really cool way in which that university investment can go a long way, even though it might be 20, 25 years out.
Well, I wrote an article at the end of last year saying that I thought 2026 would be the year when we started seeing some meaningful advancements on some of the quantum research that's been going on, and I hope you prove me right. At least you make me look right. What about you, Mary, from an engineering point of view? What are some of the things happening in your labs that you think could be potentially world-changing?
Yeah, I guess, one of the most impressive facilities we have is our Robo Hub. And so it's a physical space right in the center of one of our buildings, which is really houses all the robots. And what I love about the space, it's a very collaborative space. So instead of every researcher having their own individual lab, we have this collaborative space for robotics, and it's like a lending library. So researchers that may need a robot for a period of time can come in, borrow a robot, and do the kind of research they're doing. We do everything from kind of autonomous vehicles through to social robotics, through to drones and flying robots. And creating that ecosystem where you've got 30 researchers, not just in engineering from across the university, looking at various aspects of how robots will be deployed into the future is a wonderful intellectual community to work with. And so I think I would take you there. The other thing I think that's really interesting that's going on is in our chemical engineering unit is the development of these biocompostable plastics. And we have some of the top researchers now working on this to address some of the issues we face today with plastics in our environment. How do we eliminate these plastics, but more importantly, how do we make the next generation of plastics that are green plastics, if you will, that are going to be biocompostable, that don't have the detrimental influence on the environment that prior generations of plastics have. And then finally, I would take you to our multi-scale additive manufacturing facility, which is probably one of the top 5 in the world in terms of the advancements they've made around advanced manufacturing and being able to additively manufacture from a range of very complex materials, these very complex parts for a variety of different industries. From medical, they've even looked at using kind of mushroom and organic materials to additively manufacture containers that are biocompostable and things like this. So it's just amazing the kinds of things they're doing there.
They have to also be soft and appealing.
Right. Yes, exactly.
To the people that they're working around or with. So those are interesting applications, and I can't wait to see what some of these things look like. Waterloo is known globally for quantum research. For someone who hears the word quantum and still thinks it's mostly in the realm of science fiction, Chris, expand a little bit more on what is happening in Waterloo that will really tell us that we're getting closer to commercialization.
So I would agree with you that while quantum might still be thought of as science fiction, because it's hard to understand and it's hard to figure out where that application is, it's definitely moved well beyond that. It's entering that real early stage industry phase. And so we now have quantum computers that are being developed and starting to be employed, not only at the university, but with industries. And it's advancing that quantum computer through programs like Open Quantum Design, where you're able to bring the world's minds together and work collaboratively, despite the fact that you are at very different spots globally. The other one is in quantum communication, satellite technology. There is opportunities to be in talking to satellites, to have communications at a much faster rate, but also make sure that they are secure, that they can't be hacked. And that's going to become increasingly important as we start to think about AI going forward. But that technology is now starting to be employed. And then in quantum sensing, and I'd mentioned about the optometry example, but I also met with some founders the other year where, in fact, they're building a quantum device for marine environments. And so what they're able to do is this quantum sensor can, at a very wide scale but at extremely high resolution, map, monitor, and detect within the ocean. So everything from better understanding current flows to sediment transport, all the way through to detecting what else might be entering into that system. And from a dual use perspective, that technology exists. It's starting to be employed. And so it's about that investment that was made many years ago. It is starting to be at that industry phase. And it's an exciting moment that the university continues to really support the quantum program that is shared across 3 main faculties. It's shared between science, engineering, and the faculty of math. And it's in that unique space where those 3 come together at the Institute for Quantum Computing that we are global leaders in quantum technology that is bringing it to industry.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the things graduate school helped me with was the ability to really dig deep into a problem and understand the problem deeply, and then the confidence to be able to tackle a solution to the problem.
Yes, the confidence, you're right.
And I think that is what you really get. No, but I do believe that universities are going to have to think about how they restructure these programs to deliver that same value. But I don't think the programs necessarily go away. I don't think the need for the kind of outcomes that you're looking for in the student goes away. Mm-hmm. But the way you get to that outcome may have to change.
That's right. And that's going to have a fundamental impact on budgets, governance of how we think about universities, how we approve projects, because we have to be much more nimble. We've got to be able to allow for interdisciplinary challenges to become the foundation of the degree, while you're still learning all those the kind of deep into the domain. That's a big challenge. The undergraduate degree of the future is going to look dramatically different if we've done this right.
And I do think we need to teach the students how to use these AI tools appropriately for what they're trying to do. Again, giving them the confidence, that's a really good point, Nic, to be able to tackle some of these problems and use those tools to help them to do that.
So if we look forward, I don't know how many years we want to look forward, but let's say 5 or 10 years from now, and we were to get back together, and I was to ask you the question, how did the University of Waterloo contribute significantly to closing the gap between excellent research and technological leadership in Canada? What would your answers be?
Well, I hope we're seen as the builders of the country. Like, we're in a point in our country's history where we have to focus on building Canada and making it stronger. And I hope we are recognized as having contributed significantly to building Canada and building some industries in Canada that are thriving in 10 years from now, and that we are seen as a leader around the world in some key sectors for the future.
I think what would be, I'd hope to be able to see when we come back is that we have fundamentally changed the way in which we are, in which our degrees are being offered, the student experience, because that is that future entrepreneur. That's the person who's going to make the difference in 5, 10, 15 years down the road. That's going to be able to shorten that cycle between the lab and industry, whether it be AI, quantum, health, etc. And in that, if we've done that successfully, then that talent's going to be able to stay here, because we're going to have that ability to say it's in Canada that you have that experience, that you have that ability to translate into industry-ready technology, because AI has helped you get there faster. And we have the ecosystem that's been built around that we invest heavily as a community, as a province, as a federal government, in supporting Canadian industry staying directly here.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. This was wonderful, and I hope it turned out to be exactly as you hope it would be, or better. The University of Waterloo is one answer to Canada's commercialization problem, but it is not the only one. An hour east, in Hamilton, McMaster University is working the same problem from a different starting point and with different strategies than the University of Waterloo. It is a research-intensive university anchored in health and heavy science, where the path from discovery to product runs through hospitals, a nuclear reactor, and a manufacturing base that Hamilton has had for a century. Here is Dr. Heather Sheardown, Dean of Engineering, and Dr. Gianni Parise, Vice President of Research at McMaster. Heather, Gianni, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nic.
So McMaster University is one of the most prestigious universities in Canada, but many people in our audience will not know about McMaster. How would you guys introduce McMaster to an audience that do not know much about it?
It's a great question. Heather, did you want to give it a shot first? Or
Sure.
Yeah.
McMaster is a medium-sized comprehensive university. So that means it covers health science, engineering science, but also the humanities and social sciences and business. We're well known for our health science research. Our health science faculty really punches above its weight, quite frankly. We were the developers of problem-based learning, and that originated in the medical school and then has permeated the campus. And then we also developed evidence-based medicine. So I think those are probably the two things that we're most well known for, but much more than that. We have a great engineering school. I'm a little biased, but great science faculty. We have a nuclear reactor on campus. So there's a lot of great things about McMaster.
I think if I could, I would just add to that McMaster is broadly known as a research-intensive university. As Heather mentioned, we have had global impact with our health science research. And I think within Canada, at least, we're broadly recognized as Canada's nuclear university. And it's because, in a very unique way, we have a nuclear reactor at the heart of our campus. And that's enabled some areas of research that very few institutions can actually engage in, which I think makes us globally unique in many ways.
In addition to your own leadership roles, you're also involved in your own research. So tell us about your own individual areas of research and why you are excited about what you're doing today.
Okay. That's an awesome question, actually. You know, you spend as a researcher, you spend a lifetime training to try and answer questions that achieve two things: one, that you think are important, and two, that you find interesting. I focused my efforts over the last 20 years on muscle stem cells and how they promote muscle growth and how they fail as we get older. And I think for me, I continue to be excited about the idea of finding a solution that could help millions of people as they age and improve their quality of life. And of course, over a course of 20 years, your path evolves substantially. When I started taking very basic approaches to the questions. And as I've learned more and as we've discovered more, those questions have become a little more applied in looking at strategies. And so I remain just as excited today as I was 20 years ago on what my research might contribute to society.
And you, Heather?
When I think about research, it fills me up. I love what I do. So my area of research is ophthalmic biomaterials, which is really a fancy way of saying putting plastics into your eye in different ways. How do we use technology to better treat patients? So we're thinking about better contact lenses. How do we make a contact lens that at the end of the day you don't want to scratch your eye out with? How do we deliver drugs to the eye? And it's even more pronounced now as patients age and more people are developing age-related diseases of the eye. How do we make it so somebody doesn't have to go in every month and have an injection in their eye in order to maintain their vision? How do we treat that? And I was thinking when you asked the question, I was on a grant panel last week, and it was very much a chemistry grant panel. So not a lot of biological people in the room, but it was really exciting to read the proposals and hear what others were thinking, because that interdisciplinary piece of me was really keen to take what they were saying and apply it to my own research. So I get excited every day when I think about new solutions, new ways of thinking about the problems that we have.
So no pun intended, but Gianni, you talked about muscle, and I know that McMaster, like many other universities in Canada and elsewhere, have a major drive to build its, what I would call this entrepreneurial muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And how has this push towards more commercialization and entrepreneurship changed the way you approach research?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think the focus on commercialization, entrepreneurship, and really it's about commercialization of our discoveries. I think the focus on that is changing the way people approach the question on the front end. So I think when you look traditionally at universities and how we've been involved in commercializing discoveries, it's usually something we stumble upon at the end. We do the work, we do the research, and then someone comes along and says, wow, actually, I think we can do something with this. And that's great. I mean, some amazing discoveries have been made that way. And you might argue some of the biggest discoveries have been made that way. But embedding commercialization, or at least, commercial thinking at the beginning of a project changes the entire path.
Yeah.
And I think people are slowly evolving to think about commercialization opportunities when they begin a project rather than stumbling upon a discovery at the end and doing something with it. I've never seen actually anything like this, where I think 10 years ago, you would have seen very little in the form, and when I say that, I mean campus-wide, in the form of thinking about greater societal impact, commercialization, social impact, economic impact. These weren't things that as researchers we were trained to think about. We were trained to ask questions and try and answer them. And I think it's gotten a grip quite quickly on our campus. I think when I look at the university and I look at what our purpose is in society, traditionally I think it's always been about two things: education and research. And those are what I always refer to as the two core pillars of business at the university. I think this activity over the last decade, and very much so in the last few years, has this emerging third pillar of core business, which is commercialization of research. I think we look forward 10 years, you will see commercialization of university research, a third pillar of core business across the sector.
So Heather, if we were to walk through your faculty's labs this afternoon and you wanted to show us one or two examples of work that could genuinely reshape an industry, where would you take us?
There are lots of places I could take you, but two I would highlight. One is Jim Cotton's lab. He does work on recovering heat. So seems like a silly thing, but how do you recover heat that's just going to go out into the atmosphere? And our nuclear reactor is a perfect example of that. Our reactor is a research reactor. We don't use it for power. And any heat that's generated just gets pushed off into the atmosphere. How do we recover that and use that? And Jim's doing a simple example. He's recovering waste heat from pizza ovens. So he'll go into a pizza restaurant and take the heat that comes off of that pizza oven, capture it, and use it to heat the water or any other number of things within the restaurant. So it's not only saving money, but it's also environmentally friendly. And one of his grad students said to me at one point, we've got an ice rink. We have lots of those in Canada, next to a senior citizen's home. How do we take the heat that's being pumped out of that ice rink to cool it down and use it to make the people in the home next door warm? It just makes sense. Yeah. And the other place I would take you is our Automotive Resource Center. So there's lots of discovery going on over there around all kinds of different things. But the one that is closest to commercial success is from Ali Ahmadi's lab. He's developed motors that don't use critical minerals. So we're not relying on China, all of the things that we're talking about now in terms of diversification of what we do. His motors are being used all over the world, being used in motorcycles in India. But if you go up to the airport in Hamilton, you'll see his motors. You'll see the Enneadyme, that's the name of the company, the Enneadyme logo on all of the vehicles that are pushing and pulling the planes out of the gate. So it's really being widely adopted. And I think one of the things, they put one of their motors in a car this year in a competition that they were doing. And Ali was so proud when the people who were testing it weren't able to tell the difference between the motor that they put in that contained no critical minerals, can't remember the word. Anyway, contained no critical minerals, and the motors that came from the stock. So really exciting advances.
I'm going to look at this more broadly across the university. When I think of innovations that I think have the potential for tremendous impact, one that comes to mind is the work that Matt Miller and his team are doing in the Faculty of Health Sciences and part of Nexus Health. You'll remember when the pandemic hit, Matt's team in infectious disease quickly jumped on developing a new vaccine. But not just the vaccine, they developed a vaccine delivery system that's quite unique, that's already in clinical trial. And so that's work that will have a tremendous impact, mainly because the vaccine delivery system they're using does not require a needle poke. It's an inhaled vaccine delivery system. That's the kind of innovation at McMaster that I think has tremendous reach. There are other examples. I'm thinking about examples within my own faculty, my own department. People like Dr. Stu Phillips, and who are working on therapeutic strategies for older adults who are losing muscle mass. And of course, when you lose muscle mass, it doesn't sound like such a big deal, except the fact that when you lose muscle mass, what typically follows is a significant loss in quality of life. And so they're working on strategies to help maintain muscle mass as we get older and maintain quality of life. Some of that stuff's getting commercialized, right? And there was actually a patent that he and I filed years ago that we ended up selling to another McMaster company that commercialized it and actually has a product on the market now, targeted at older adults. Those are just two real simple examples, but this is we see this sort of innovation across campus. Health sciences is quite active in this space. You might be aware of the work that John Stokes has done using AI in a drug discovery effort, and who, very shortly after starting his work with using AI in this way, was able to develop a antimicrobial that's been effective in treating irritable bowel syndrome. Eric Brown in health sciences, who's using AI to develop natural derived drug products or molecules for therapeutics. So we have really talented people at this institution that do very impressive things that can have significant impacts.
Yeah, and you mentioned Matt's innovation around the drug delivery capabilities to develop. It's not just the fact that you don't need needles, but it's also the fact that for respiratory type diseases, you can get the drugs into the lungs directly, and therefore it becomes much more effective as well. So I had a chance to look at what he was doing. That's really interesting. One of McMaster's areas of strength is bioinnovation. What is bioinnovation, and what are some of the major activities and breakthroughs that are happening in bioinnovation at McMaster?
Yeah. So bioinnovation is exactly as it sounds when you break that up. It's innovation in a space where we develop strategies or drugs or molecules that can improve health for people, generally speaking. I think a great example is the work that's being done at McMaster in radiopharmaceuticals. These are widely considered bioinnovations in that we're developing molecules to treat cancers, and in many cases, very difficult to treat cancers. And we're doing it using approaches that, frankly, are novel to McMaster. Fusion Pharmaceuticals, as we know, is a great example of that.
Clearly one of McMaster's strengths, and it's well known, is in the area of bioinnovation. Mm-hmm. But there's another strength that is maybe not as well known, and that is McMaster's nuclear research capabilities. McMaster has a capability that no other university in Canada has, which is a functioning nuclear reactor, and I think very few universities in the world. Can you share with our audience what role this reactor plays in treating cancer patients globally at scale today? And it's a two-part question. The second part of the question is, can you walk us through how this unique capability is playing a role in shaping some of the research that's going on at McMaster?
Yeah, so the nuclear reactor is truly a defining feature for McMaster University, and when you look at it from a historical perspective, it was tremendous foresight to see what the impact of having a reactor on our campus could have. You talked a little bit about how the reactor is contributing at scale for cancer treatments, and right now, the McMaster nuclear reactor produces about 60% of the world's supply of iodine-125, which is used for prostate cancer. We treat about 70,000 patients a year with medical isotope that is made at the reactor here at McMaster University. I think that's a tremendous success story. But it's really the tip of the iceberg when you look at what that reactor is capable of. The reactor really enables research in three main areas. One of those areas is materials research. And this was enabled because off of the core in the reactor, we have a number of beam lines that allow us to capture neutrons and use those neutrons in neutron scattering experiments when you're looking at materials. So you can characterize a material by hitting it with neutrons and looking at the behavior of those neutrons. There's, one of the main functions, or a function at the reactor associated with materials research and materials characterization involves turbine blades that go into every airplane. About 70% of the airplanes in this country have turbine blades that have gone through our nuclear reactor and characterized in our reactor. So that is tremendous when you think about the impact. The work we have that we can do in energy. Heather's talked a little bit about that and how right now the world's going through a global build out or a global energy transition. Nuclear is going to be a significant part of that transition. In fact, when we talk about issues like achieving net zero, it's become clear that net zero will be impossible without nuclear as a core pillar in the strategy. Renewables are important, but nuclear energy is going to be the core pillar in achieving net zero. And we're doing research with our reactor in energy. And the third is the radiopharmaceuticals piece. We talked about medical isotopes. We're doing other work in medical isotopes using the reactor as well. And we're building around this. So the nuclear reactor is a focal point. We're recruiting researchers to McMaster who will work and interface with the reactor, both in energy and in actually across all three: energy, medical isotopes, and material science.
I want to shift gears a little bit and go back to some of the commercialization and things we touched on earlier. A couple of years ago, McMaster produced one of the largest commercialization outcomes in Canadian university history, I think, when in March of 2024, AstraZeneca announced the acquisition of Fusion Pharmaceuticals, a McMaster spin-out founded by chemistry professor John Valiant. I think the company was acquired for $2.4 billion, I think, which is one of the largest such deals in Canadian university history. Can one of you tell us a little bit about that company and what made it so special?
Shall I give it a
Sure.
So, it's interesting. I would love to be able to sit here and tell you that the success of Fusion Pharmaceuticals was because McMaster was just had all the pieces in place to support the commercialization of that research. But the actual reality is that the success of Fusion, in some ways, came in spite of the commercialization or lack of commercialization ecosystem that was in place at that time. John Valiant really deserves a lot of credit in this space because he overcame a lot of hurdles to bring Fusion to where it ended with an acquisition by AstraZeneca. Probably 10 to 15 years ago, almost 15 years ago, John applied for a grant through the federal government that saw him establish a center of excellence at McMaster. The point of the center of excellence was, and the title of it was the Center for Probe Development and Commercialization. It was very unique at the time. It was about commercializing research. And he took that, and actually there were multiple spin-out companies that came out of CPDC, one of which was Fusion, the most successful so far, which was Fusion. So, as I say, John deserves a lot of credit. I would love for McMaster to take the credit for that, but I think we learned a lot, frankly, from the success of Fusion and the challenges that Dr. Valiant faced bringing Fusion to the market.
There were some things, though, that happened that supported John in a way that we probably would not have known at the time. So I was involved with a partnership with the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, And what that allowed us to do was build out, and it was biomedical innovation facilities at our innovation park. And if you look back, I think people would say that was not a successful endeavor. The partnership was fine, but it didn't lead to anything amazing. We were hoping it would lead to great commercialization outcomes. But what it did provide was a space for John to move Fusion into. And he had to do renovations to it, but really that space would not have been available, and John would not have been in Hamilton had we not had that partnership. So that biomedical innovation and biomedical engineering advanced manufacturing initiative really supported. So I think the my outcome of that is that sometimes you do things and you don't know what it's going to lead to, but it does have a ripple effect in the end.
But success is not always linear, and there are always challenges along the way. And when you're the first or one of the first, you have to deal with, kind of, as people would say, cleaning the pipe and getting the processes right, and even in some cases identifying issues that people may not even be aware of. So I think looking back, one can say that maybe there was a lot more the university could have done that would have made John's path easier. But the real question is, in my opinion, is not so much that, but the real question is, what is the university doing today to make sure that this is not a one-off and it is not as difficult in the future? So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, for sure. So, as I say, I think in the last few years, we've seen significant focus in the university sector on commercialization. Certainly at McMaster, we've really jumped in with both feet in terms of trying to support commercialization of our discoveries. And part of that was a review of all of our entrepreneurship and commercialization assets on our campus. This was commissioned by our president when she first came into office last summer. The idea there was to really get a sense, an inventory of what we have on this campus and what we're doing to promote commercialization. And we learned a lot of things through that review. One of those things was that we actually have significant numbers of supports in place, different programs, different initiatives to support these activities. But what we learned was that they weren't necessarily coordinated very well. And so it was disparate pieces across the ecosystem. And so our task was really about developing an ecosystem that was streamlined, that brought all of these disparate pieces together to support commercialization. And when we looked at that, when we looked at all of our assets, we looked for the gaps. Where do we need more help for our researchers? If I may add as well, the innovation minor is open to students across all campus. Yeah. So any student can take it. And I've been part of some of the courses that have been offered. I've gone in and we've had a guest speaker. I've sort of moderated discussion and that sort of thing. I'll tell you, there is a tremendous appetite for entrepreneurship and innovation amongst our youngest members of our community, our undergraduate students. They want more of this, and that to me is what's exciting about where we're heading.
I know and I would say if they had that, I would probably be taking that class too. So I mentioned earlier that we have gotten pretty oversaturated with AI discussions, but I do have a few AI related questions, and I'm looking for short, quick answers here. I have a bunch of them. So I want to start with you, Heather. Are you personally using AI today, and how are you using it?
I probably don't use it enough. I use it for things like making a grant read better or something like that. Right? Making it, how do I make this email sound softer? But probably not enough. I mean, when I talk to engineering graduates in Silicon Valley, they're using it every day, and 40, 50, 60% of their day. So I need to learn more. I think our students are probably using it far more than I am.
Yeah, I use it quite a bit. Gianni, for you, Are you concerned about AI having a negative impact on the integrity of research?
No, I think it's early days. I think we need to be careful about how we adopt AI and how we need to provide guardrails about ethical ways of using AI, which we're doing. But no, I think AI is going to be, when all the dust settles, a very powerful tool that our researchers will be able to use to advance their research more quickly and more effectively.
For you, Heather, will AI change the concept of graduate studies? For example, can it negate the need to offer master's degrees?
I don't think so, but I do think it can augment what is happening in the graduate program. Propose an experiment that would allow me to show this. It would just probably save hours of reading the literature for those students.
Yeah. So I believe that AI is not just something you figure out how to use, but in my opinion, AI is compelling a complete re-architecture of everything: products, businesses, even universities. How is McMaster responding to both the promise and disruptive potential of AI?
We have had a large number of conversations. It seems like a daily conversation, actually, and how we integrate AI into both the academic programs and into research, and what's responsible use of AI. I think when we all take a step back, AI is not something that we have a choice with. AI is here, and so it's and it is the future, and so. I think we need to work hard to make sure that we're integrating AI into everything we do. And as I say, I don't see it as an issue. I'm not concerned about it. I just think we need to figure it out. I don't think we're quite there yet.
I liken it to the internet in the 90s, where it was going to rot all of our brains, and yet here we are, almost 30 years later, and it hasn't rotted our brains. It's enhanced our lives.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So either one of you could answer this question. You could both answer it. If you had 30 seconds with Prime Minister Carney today regarding AI policy, what policy recommendation would you make?
That's a hard question. Yeah, I think it's important that there are guardrails around when and how it's used. So, and where this is coming from, I met with an engineer a couple of weeks ago. So she graduated the same year as me, has been working for a long time. And her comment was she can use AI because she knows when what it's giving her is technically impossible. So how do we put guardrails around its use to make sure that some young engineer doesn't implement something that is not technically feasible or going to lead to a catastrophic impact? So how do we put guardrails around it? And it might be things like having somebody check the work in a different way or something like that. But I think policies around things can't be designed by AI, for example. There has to be human oversight.
Yeah.
I think for me, I take a broader perspective, and I think we live in an age where sovereignty is becoming more and more important to us, and I'd be encouraging the Prime Minister to enable the growth of sovereign AI in the country with some urgency, because I think we're adopting much faster than we're seeing the launch of AI data centers develop within the country, and there would be concern on my part that we're going to see this bleed out of the country if we're not quick.
So I have two last questions, one for each of you. The first one is going to be for you, Heather. If you were to redesign your department or faculty from scratch today, aiming for 2035, what would you keep? What would you scrap? What would you invent?
What I would keep,
Better hope certain people aren't watching this.
no, we have amazing committed faculty members who interact with students on a daily basis. So I would keep the people. But if I was thinking about what education is going to look like, I don't think it's going to be a lecture. I don't think it's going to be an exam. I think we need more hands-on experiential learning where our students are learning as they go and making mistakes as they go in a safe environment. Because an exam, let's be honest, is a very contrived situation. You go in for 2.5 hours, you put everything you know on paper, you walk out the door and you forget most of what you wrote on that paper. But what is a real world situation? You sitting with a group trying to figure out something and, figuring out what you needed to know in order to solve that problem. So I would say more hands-on learning, more experiential learning, less lectures, less people talking at the students, and more people talking with the students.
If a listener was to take away only one thing about McMaster University based on this conversation, what would you like it to be?
I think if a listener were to take one thing away, it's that McMaster University is going to lead the evolution of what a university means in society. That we are breaking the boundaries of education and research. We are going to be levers of economic development for our local community, for the country. We are going to integrate into what we do at this university, our community, our hospitals, our city. The university, McMaster has more to offer than it has. And so I think we're going to lead what the future of universities looks like.
That's an awesome answer because, when I think about the enduring pillars of a university, it's obviously research, the acquisition of knowledge, teaching, which is the dissemination of knowledge, and then the societal impact to society, positive impact to society. And I couldn't imagine a better answer.
Yeah, that was really
thank
good.
you
Yeah.
very much, both of you, for taking this time. Really appreciate this conversation. These conversations are about something larger than any one university. It's about what the country does with its best ideas, how it builds an innovation economy. Canada has never had a problem developing world-class research. So why do the jobs and economic returns created by those science and engineering breakthroughs so often end up somewhere else? One big reason is the gravitational pull of private capital. At the stage where startups raise their largest rounds, close to 80 or 90% of the capital in Canada's biggest deals come from outside the country. Closing that gap will require not only more and earlier capital, but also customers willing to buy from a domestic supplier and other incentives for a founder to build in Canada instead of leaving. The stakes are higher today than they were in the past. Technologies leaving the country now in AI, medicine, and energy will decide which countries will have competitive advantages over the next several decades. Having a consumer app company leave is an economic loss, but losing the compounding benefits of a medical or artificial intelligence breakthrough is a long-term strategic setback. Both universities in this episode produce many of those kinds of breakthroughs. The next step is supporting them with the capital, customers, and policies to turn homegrown science into homegrown technology companies. Well, thank you all for tuning in to TechSurge podcast from Celesta Capital. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it, subscribe, or leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. We'll be back every 2 weeks with more insights and discussions of all things deep tech. Bye for now.